So continue on to 4. And then at 10:55 or maybe even earlier, we'll go over more questions from the quiz prep 2-1 to 2-3. Last week we did number 4, and then we did the bonus for practice 10B at 11:20 to 11:50. That's when the quiz is. Thursday, we're going to wrap up chapter 2, which means we're going to finish up 2, 4 through 5. And here's what I kind of came to with Monday, Wednesday. Because of the practice that or the questions I wanted to answer for the chapter 2 quiz, I would have had to cram in a lot of 2, 4, 2, 5. And that definitely didn't feel right. So I moved the test again. You've known this also, Mr. Clark. I moved it back a day, which kind of actually makes it a little more, not so much convenient, but just in case things conflict next Tuesday, because it is election day. I don't want to run into any question. I mean, I don't want you stressing out over 3 things. Okay, so the test is next Thursday. Next Tuesday, we'll review. So this Thursday, we'll finish up all the stuff that we have to finish up, get the review sheet. Next Tuesday, we'll review. Next Thursday on the 7th, homework is due and the chapter 2 test. Okay. This last Saturday, I went to an Ice Cube concert and a World Series game broke out. Ice Cube opened up the World Series game rather than anything. But I did a lot better job than Pat Show, which is the first time I ever heard of Pat Show. Last year. He was the guy in the are we there yet? Right? Yeah. Isn't it amazing how Ice-T has been on Law and Order since 30 years now almost? And how did he get famous? Writing songs like Top Killer. He's like 72 or something. They were retired him a long time. Okay. We've covered so far solving quadratic equations by factoring and the square root method. So take a quick look. Here's the review sheet. Question 1 is just like what you're doing on the quiz right now. Adding radicals, imaginary numbers, simplify first. Question 2, multiply. Simplify first. Number 3, square that out. Simplify again. Number 4 is just like the bonus question. It's number 6 on the quiz prep, but it's not a mandatory question on the quiz, it's a bonus question on the quiz. Okay. And then you have these questions where we're solving. We have to follow directions. These 3 examples, you have to solve the equation by factoring. You solve it any other way, whether the answers are right, even if the answers are right, you get 0 points. You have to show the steps and be able to factor on those examples. On your test, you're just going to have one where you got to show me how you factor. These 3 examples, you have to show what I'm about to work over with you is completing the square method. So there's 3 examples of completing the square. You have to do one on your test where you have to be able to do completing the square. Here's 3 examples that we're going to cover on Thursday, quadratic formula. So 3 examples of quadratic formula, not to mention whatever else you have on the homework. You have to show that you can do the quadratic formula for one problem on the test. That's what the directions say. Any other way is 0 points. Okay. And then the direction can become this. Solve using any algebraic method. You must show appropriate work. You see how it's written every single problem? You must show appropriate work to receive credit. No work, no credit. So one thing that's not there is the square root method. It doesn't say you have to show the square root method. Well, right here, I'm giving a problem every single week. Here's a problem that is set up for the square root method. Isolate the constant because you have a perfect square. Take the square root of both sides. Simplify, don't forget the plus and minus. Solve for x. Okay, it's there. The square root method is also in the completing the square method. So the square root method is ingrained into other problems and is also in the completing the square method. That's why it's not going to be one of the mandatory methods you have to show. All the other methods that you see here, here's your notes. I implore you, I beg of you, if you want to do well, this is what you want to try first. Try factoring. I wrote a lot of the test questions where factoring will work. Not every single one of them. But where you get to do your own method, factoring will be the quickest, nicest, simplest way to do the problem. And something like number 15 right here, where it's x to the fourth, it's not a quadratic. A quadratic is x squared. You can't do x to the quadratic formula, completing the square, on x to the fourth, unless you do some other stuff first, which I'm telling you right now, try factoring. I will show you examples of that during 2.5. But if you try factoring, you'll be done in less than a minute. You know what happens? Then try factoring. And another hair falls out on my head. Yeah. Fractions, undo fractions. Fractions, undo fractions. So call what we put. This test. When people ask me, what do I need to do? How can I blah, 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 blah. The review sheet has 20 questions. But the test has 14 problems. 14 problems at 10 points apiece. So the test is worth 140 points. There are 6 bonus questions. And they're worth 5 points apiece. 5 points apiece. So that's 30 bonus points. So you can score 170 out of 140 on this. Is there anything I can do? You don't ask that at the end of the semester. You ask it, well, you don't even ask it. It's been here all along. Understand that. Is there anything I can do? There's been something you could be doing all semester long. Offer my syllabus. And now let's complete the square. So this is what I posted last week with all the methods and their step-by-step and what I expect to see from you. This is completing the square. So if you haven't actually looked at this yet, and the announcements right here from last week, solving quadratic step-by-step, chapter 2 factor practice, right there. Then the announcements I also emailed. Homework, we're doing example We did through 30 last week, so we're doing number 33. We're gonna do 33 and 44. And the directions, they're also explicit. You solve the quadratic equation by completing the square. So we have x squared plus 4x minus 32. Equals 0. And then number 44. You put it over here to the side, so 4x squared, 16x, minus 5 equals 0. I'm going to take you through this step by step. That's right. And just so I'm clear, when I tell you this, just so I'm incredibly explicitly clear about this trifactor. When you get to the questions where it says solve it any way you want, as long as you show out an algebraic method and show your work. Watch. If you have practiced your factoring, if you come in for help, if you try, I put out a factoring practice worksheet. Come on, I even put in an announcement. Come in anytime, office hour. We'll go through it. This is x minus 8 times x plus 4. So x minus 8 equals 0, x plus 4 equals 0, add 8. X equals 8, subtract 4. This x is equal to negative 4, so my two answers are a negative 4 and a positive 8. If you know how to factor, or if you work on your factor, you're all capable of this. You got to work at it. I'm not showing off. I'm trying to tell you, you can get to this. Maybe you're not going to do it in under 20 seconds. You're not going to win a prize. There's no bonus points for turning it in first. But it's certainly a lot. It's less messy than trying to do completing the square or quadratic formula. And everybody just goes straight to the quadratic formula. They don't want to do anything else because all you got to do is plug in numbers. You know what? I've seen you guys plug in negatives and you refuse to use parentheses. But here we go. First, we're completing the square. Here we go. So completing the square. I need this one and I need this one. Okay. Step 1. Is that big enough? Yes or no? Yes. Step one. And again, if you already printed this out, good for you. If you haven't printed it out, what are you waiting for? This method is used to solve any quadratic equation that may be written in standard form, something times x squared plus something times x plus a constant equals 0. Step one, you isolate the constant. So these three terms, the constant is the one that doesn't have a variable, the one that doesn't have an x. So the constant is that c. Over here, who's the constant? The 32, negative 32. So we're going to isolate the constant and then hit you have parentheses here. Remember to leave an open spot where that constant was. It's called completing the square. So that means we're going to put something there. We're going to isolate the constant, so we're going to add 32 to both sides. And when we do that, we're going to complete the square down here. So we're going to need to leave that little open spot right there. X squared minus 4x, empty spot, equals 32 over here, because we want to put something that makes a perfect square. That's step one. Step two, check A. A is the coefficient of the square term. What's in front of the square term? Check A, make sure A is equal to 1. This completing the square does not work unless it's 1 times x squared. It has to be 1 times x squared. And what is the A right here? Okay, positive 1. 1 times x squared. So we're good. If it's not a 1, if A does not equal 1, you divide all the terms by whatever A is. You divide everybody by A. When we do 44, it's 4x squared. So A is a 4. That's the example that we'll do to cover that type of scenario. So we're good. We're good to go. Step 2 is taken care of. Step 3 is where it's like a recipe. It's like making a cake. You have directions now, something to follow. Take 1/2 of B. Take half of B. Take a cup of sugar. Take a half of B. B is the coefficient of x to the first. It's the coefficient of your first degree variable, first degree x. So right here, this is x to the first. So right here, B is negative 4. That's what's in front of my x to the first. I always write it out on the side. I don't care how simple it may be. What's half of 4? I can do that in my head. Good for me. You know, I'm not going to get a dog treat. I literally write it out like 1/2 of negative 4. Because it's not always going to be that simple. Half of negative 4. And then what's half of negative 4? Negative 2. Take 1/2 of B, so I get B over 2. Square the result. Now I'm going to square that. I take half of B, and then I'm going to, parentheses, I'm going to square it. What is negative 2 squared? I get positive 4. You take 1/2 of B, you square it. Now you're going to add that to both sides. I'm going to add that 4 to both sides. Over here I have x squared minus 4x plus 4. And over there I have 36. We have just completed a perfect square trinomial that is ready for factor. Oh, that wording. But here's the good news. You're going to factor this left side, and it will always factor into this or this.
a perfect square, a plus b perfect square, or a minus b perfect square. Right here, this is x minus 2 perfect square. It is a perfect square, x minus 2. Now, you got to get confident at that step. And it's only going to work if it's 1x squared and you correctly took half of the b and you squared it and you added it to both sides. If we do it step by step, there's no common factor. First times first is x squared. What times what will make x squared?
X.
X times x. The sign. Last times last is positive, but the middle is a negative. The only way that this is going to factor is if my two signs are both negatives. A negative times a negative would make a positive here, and two negatives add up to a negative in the middle. And then last times last is 4. I can make a 4 with a 1 times a 4 or a 2 times a 2. Which of those factors have the best chance of making 4 in the middle? 1 and 4, 2 and 2. 2 and 2. Outside is negative 2x. Inside is negative 2x. Negative 2x and negative 2 add up to negative 4x. So this is the factoring for this, which is x minus 2 times itself, x minus 2 perfect square. Always. And it's called completing the square. So that means we should get a perfect square. And we do steps 1, 2, and 3, correct? It will always be a perfect square of a plus b, or a perfect square of a minus perfect square, and that's a perfect square. Now, here's why I write it on the side. Over here, when I took half of b, I write down half of negative 4, and then I get negative 2. This half of b, right here inside my parentheses, right before the square half, will always be what ends up right there. Always. It will be that part. So if I write it on the side, I know exactly what's going to end up inside my parentheses. It's just a nice little happy coincidence. But it also means, since I'm writing it down, I'm not doing stuff in my head. Yeah, I can do half of 4 in my head and square it in my head and add that on both sides. I can do that stuff in my head, but you know what? I don't trust what's going on in my head anymore anyway. This is called completing the square, and we just did it. But now we use it to solve. This is now the square root method, where you have a perfect square and a constant. We have a perfect square and a number. We just made the square root method out of it. That's the whole purpose. Right. All right. So step 5. Take the square root of both sides, simplify completely, and don't forget the plus or minus. Take the square root of both sides, x minus 2, square root of the x minus 2 squared, the square root undoes the square, I just get x minus 2, equals square root of 36, Don't forget the plus and minus, so it's a plus or a minus. Square root of 36 is 6. Take the square root of both sides. And then solve for the variable. Simplify the answer completely, if possible. Show your work, all of it, neatly. And for x, then I'm going to add 2 to both sides. How many answers are on the right? There's 2 answers, a -6 and a +6. So first thing, the 2 should be in front of the plus minus. It should be x equals 2 and then a plus or a -6. That's not simplified. You have to go as far as you can take it. If I can't combine those 2 together, then I can stop. Example, if it was 2 plus or minus a square root 6, I can stop because I can't add a square root 6 to a 2. They're not like terms. If it was 2 plus or minus a 6i, I can stop because I can't combine a 2 with a 6i. But I can add a 2 and a 6 together. It's just a 2 and a 6. So I have to separate this into 2 answers. One answer is 2 minus 6, and the other one is equal to 2 plus 6. If you can keep going, you gotta keep going. 2 minus 6, -4. 2 plus 6 is +8. I get -4 and a positive. Oh, that's what we got over here by factoring. That happened in about 30 seconds. If it factors. Or if the directions say do it any way you want. If it says complete the square, you have to go that way. Even if you can factor it, you still have to go that way. Okay. But that's how you take it through the completing the square method. One step at a time, and as you do your homework, take it through each step, one step at a time, so you have those steps in your. You don't get to use notes on your test, so you have those steps ingrained. You know, and you can bring them up. I have to do this one step at a time every time. You do all the review sheet examples, same way. All right. Number 44. And a little bit of a different issue. Because it has, instead of a 1x squared, it's a 4x squared. However, whether it doesn't matter what it is. If you slow yourself down one step at a time, you can get there. First step, isolate the constant. First of all, who's the constant?
-5.
-5. So to isolate that constant, we add 5 to both sides. When we do that, the next thing is bring everything down from left to right. And we're going to leave a little open spot where that 5 was, because we're going to complete the square right in there. Then the next step, make sure A is a 1. It doesn't work if it's a 4x squared, it has to be 1x. So we divide everything by 4. If A doesn't equal 1, you divide all the terms by A. So divide by 4, divide by 4, and divide by 4. Simplify. This is now x squared. Simplify. Don't leave 16 over 4. Reduce it to lowest terms. Maybe you might have a fraction still, but that's fine. But at least you reduced it to lowest terms. Minus 16 divided by 4 is just 4x. Still an empty spot. Over here, it's 5 over 4. No decimals, no mixed numbers. If you're going to do complete and square, a decimal is not going to help you out. 1 1/4 is not going to help you out. Leave it as a mixed number. Sorry, leave it as an improper fraction. Okay? Definitely no decimal. And now we're at step 3. Half of b. So 1/2 of -4. Now, unfortunately, it's going to be the same b as the last problem, but they really didn't give me a lot of choices in terms of example there. So we'll do something else later when we do the review. Half of -4 is -2. And then you square that and we get +4. And then that's what you add to both sides. On the left, x squared minus 4x plus 4. On the right, you have to have a journey back to your 5th grade self and add fractions. It's 5 over 4 plus 4. When you add fractions, you need a common denominator. So this would be 4 over 1. The least common denominator between a 4 and a 1 is a what? A 4. So my denominators have to both be 4s. This one's already got the 4, so we don't change 5 over 4 at all. 5 fourths. This one has to be multiplied by 4 over 4. So this 4 is actually 16 over 4 when I make a common denominator. So when I add these two fractions together, I get 21 over 4. You have to be able to add and subtract fractions. We're way past elementary school, we're way past high school. Got to be able to add fractions. And if that's a struggle, then that's something you need to either work out with tutoring or come in here. Come to me. Step 2 is done. Sorry, that's step 3. Step 3 is done. The left side is a nice, perfect square that's equal to 21 over 4. Because you have x squared, this has to be x times x. So it'll be an x. Because that's a plus, but the middle is a minus. It's going to be minus and a minus. So minus. If they were both pluses, you'd have a plus in between. So right here, when we factor it, this is if you had 2 pluses. This is when you have a minus and a plus. 2 pluses, that's a minus and a plus. And then last times last is 4, so the perfect square that makes 4 would be a 2. Now remember what I told you. Here's my half of b. And there it is right there in my factoring. Take the square root of both sides. Simplify, don't forget your plus and minus. Square root. Square root of the whole fraction. This is now just x minus 2. Equals plus or minus. Remember the rules about
simplifying square roots. No perfect squares less than a square root. However, no fractions left inside of the square root either. So you can't have square root 21/4. But what you can do is rewrite this as square root 21 over the square root of 4. Separate it into the square root numerator over the square root denominator. The square root of 21 doesn't simplify. There's no perfect squares in it. That's 7 times 3 doesn't break it out. What's the square root of 4? 2. So this square root of 21/4 is square root 21 over 2. And now we solve. To solve that, x minus 2 equals plus or minus square root 21/2. Add 2. On the last one that we did, we were able to add the 2 to the plus or the minus the 6. We could combine those because they're like terms. They're numbers. I can't combine the 2 with the square root 21/2. So the final answer is this 2 and then plus or minus square root of 21/2. You can just leave it like that. Answer at the bottom, 2 plus or minus square root 21/2. It's two different answers, two separate. If you split it up, it would be 2 minus square root 21/2, comma, 2 plus square root 21/2. We separated it at the plus and minus. Don't put 2 behind it. Put 2 in front of it. That way there's no chance of anybody thinking that 2 is inside the radical with the 21. So that's how we complete the square. So that gets you all the way through 45. All right. So this now is the last thing before we do questions. The quadratic formula preview. Just a preview. When you're solving ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And I'll walk you through the steps or put up all the steps on Thursday. It only works if it's equal to 0. And the only reason why we would need to do completing the square and quadratic formula outside of the directions tell you to is because it didn't factor. If it factors, try factor. So the reason for these other methods is because it does. If I'm solving ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, then this x, the quadratic formula tells us that this x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times the a. So what you have to do is, number 1, make sure it equals 0. Number 2, identify a, b, and c, the coefficients. The coefficient of x squared is a. The coefficient of x to the first, that's the b. And then the constant is c. And then you plug it in. But you have to know this formula. Again, no notes. A tattoo is fine. If you want to actually have a tattoo of it, I can't tell you you can't. But it better be an actual tattoo. So on that problem, it equals 0. A is the 4. B is negative 16. C is the negative 5. Always make a list. Then, because I don't get to use notes, I always write out the formula. Every time I write out the formula, it helps me know the formula. X is going to equal, and listen to how I say this. Opposite of B. I don't say negative, I say the opposite of B. Because if B is a negative 16 and I say negative B, people think that the negative 16 takes care of that negative B. It's the opposite of B. Plus or minus the square root. B squared minus 4 times this A times that C, all over 2 times. Then just substitute for A, B, and C. Do not try to substitute and simplify. Don't try to plug numbers in and try to simplify them at the same time. Again, showing off doesn't get you extra credit. Finishing first, no extra credit. X equals the opposite, and then B is a negative 16. So that's why opposite of B, plus or minus B squared, parentheses, negative 16 squared. If you don't put it in parentheses and you just put negative 16 squared, then there's no way to get the next step right. Even if you got the right answer, what you wrote is incorrect. The next step would be positive 256. But if you tell me that this is positive 256, I'm going to say, no, it's not. Your work doesn't justify your answer without parentheses. Haven't I been saying parentheses like a lot? My head is turning into a parentheses, negative 16 squared minus 4 times A is a 4 times C is a negative 5 all over 2 times A is a 4. I know 2 times 4 is 8. But I'm going to write it. That way everybody's in their place. Then we simplify. X is equal to a negative 16 is now positive 16. Plus or minus square root. A negative squared is a positive. 16 squared is 256. Negative times a positive times a negative. So I'm going to end up with a positive. Negative times a positive times a negative. I'm going to end up with a positive. 16 times 5 is 80. Okay. 4 times 4 is 16. And then 16 times 5 is 80. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times that 20 is 80. Down below 80. $16 plus or minus square root 256 plus 80 is 336 all over 8. You have to simplify completely. Simplify completely. So that is 16 times 21. Well, we get a 4 and a 4. 21 is 7 and 3. So a 4 will escape and 21 goes back in. So this is X equals 16 plus or minus. A 4 escapes, square root 21 left behind, all over 8. Still not done because I can simplify. 16, 4, and 8 have a common factor. What goes into 16, 4, and 8 even? All three of them. 4. So 2 things. You either need to show me that you factor out a 4. This 4 times 4 plus or minus square root 21 all over 4 times 2. And you stop here,
as one fraction and leave it as one fraction like this. Or if you want to be really safe about it, if you don't trust yourself, do the splits. Separate this into two fractions. It's 16/8 plus or minus 4 square root of 21/8. Separate the fraction into two separate fractions. And then 16/8 is 2, plus or minus 4 goes into that 8, I get up here, square root of 21/2, which is what we got when we did completing the square. I really hope you split the fraction into two, because you do a better job of simplifying that way. This is what I will not give you any credit for, but you'll lose points, not anything. When you start doing this, because that's not simplified. That's hoping you get it right. It usually doesn't work. You can't do that because there's a plus minus. And you start crossing things off. All right. So now it is your time to ask questions until 11:10. Like I said, we already did the 2.1 to 2.3 quiz prep number 4 and 10B. What else do you want to see? Number 6. Okay. And number 6 is bonus level. It's not going to be a mandatory, it's going to be a bonus. On the test next week, it will be a mandatory test question, but not. 5 plus I over 5 plus 3I. You cannot have any type of radical in the denominator. We have to rationalize the denominator. The I is a square root of a -1, so we can't have an I down there as well. Because there's two terms, we have to multiply by the conjugate. The conjugate is going to give us A plus BI times A minus BI. So the conjugate of the denominator, all you do is multiply by exactly these two same things, 5 and a 3i. And since that's a plus, the conjugate will be a minus. If this was a minus, the conjugate would be a plus. Change the sign. And whatever you do to the denominator, you have to also do it to the numerator. Same number, because that way you're only multiplying by a 1. In the numerator, you're going to have to distribute. Okay. Now we distribute. In the numerator, 5 times 5 is 25. Positive times a negative is going to be a negative. 5 times 3i, that's 15i. So that's the 5. Now we distribute the second time. Positive times positive, that's a positive. I times 5 is 5i. And then here's the tricky one. Last times last. Positive times a negative, get the sign up, it's a negative. I times 3i is 3i squared. I times 3i, I times I squared. But all over. Now the denominator, that a plus b times a minus b is going to be a squared minus b squared. So if you just want to do this, 5 plus 3i, 5 minus 3i, and you know it's going to be 25 minus 9i squared, I have no problem with you using the special product rule. Then just make sure you simplify. But if you don't want to risk it, you worry about getting it wrong, distribute. 5 times 5, 25. Positive 5 times negative 3i, that's a negative 15i. Positive 3i times 5, that's a positive 15. And then the tricky one is the last times flat. A positive times a negative, negative. 3i times 3i is 9i squared. So then we simplify. We got a 25. Negative 15i and positive 15i. So negative 15 plus 5, that's negative 10i. And then this. It's negative 3. What's I squared? Negative 1. So that's negative 3 times negative 1. So down here it's plus 3. This is 25. Negative 15i plus 15i adds up to 0, and that's what it's supposed to do. Nothing in the middle. Should make a 0. And then minus 9. I squared is negative 1. Negative 9 times negative 1, that's a positive 9. And right here, 25 minus 9, I squared, negative 1, that's 25 plus 9, just like right there. So I can still combine 25 and 3, that's 28. And then a positive 10i. So 25 plus 3 is 28, and then a minus negative 10. And then 25 plus 9 over 34. Okay. You have to simplify completely. So this is what I'm getting at. You either need to show that you can simplify this by factoring or do the splits with the fraction. If you just start crossing things off, you're not going to get full credit. The common factor of 28, 10, and 34 is a 2. So you either need to show that you factor out a 2, which is 14 minus 5i. Down here is 2 times 17. Then you can reduce, so it's 14 minus 5i all over a 17. You have to show that you factor before you reduce, or you do the splits. Separate it into 2 fractions. It's 28 over 34 minus 10i over 34. And then simplify the individual part. That's 2 times 14. That's 2 times 17. So the 2's reduced, and we have 14 over 17. Minus. This is 2 times 5, that's 2 times 17. That reduces, we have 5i over 17. And you leave it like that. But don't just cross things out. So number 6, what else? 90. So in the bonus round, let's see if I can write it correctly. Yeah, 5 over x minus 4. Plus 1 over x plus 4 equals 2 over x squared minus 16. Whenever you have fractions, we want to undo the fractions. We need the least common denominator. My least common denominator, I have to be able to undo an x minus 4, so it would have to have an x minus 4 in it. So I would need to multiply every term by an x minus 4. And don't be lazy, actually write this out. Everybody gets multiplied by an x minus 4. All the terms. Now, x minus 4 is not going to undo an x plus 4. To undo an x plus 4, I would need to multiply this term by an x plus 4, which means I got to multiply everybody by an x plus 4 as well. Now, especially today, this right here, should I multiply by an x squared minus 16? No, because I hope you remember factoring this x squared minus 16. This is actually x plus 4 times x minus 4. And so it will be today in the bonus question. So there's no curveball. So the least common denominator that's going to undo all of those fractions and make it simple is x plus 4 times x minus 4. Now, before I go too far ahead of myself, when you have an x in the denominator, you have to think a little bit ahead. What answer do I have to think about just in case it won't work in the final original question? This x better not come out equal to positive 4. Because if I get a 4, 4 minus 4 would give me 0. I can't divide by 0. This x better not equal negative 4. If, when I work this out, if I get negative 4 or positive 4, then I got to throw them away. Because they don't work the original equation. And that's what I'm trying to solve, is that original problem. If I don't get those, then no problem. But I do have to think, what do I need to worry about? What do I have to think about? Okay. The purpose was to undo the fraction. X minus 4 reduced. I have 5 x plus 4 plus x plus 4 reduces. I have 1 times x minus 4 equals x plus 4 reduces, x minus 4 reduces, I give it 2. No more fractions. Remember, step 1, simplify both sides completely, undo fraction. Well, I wasn't on the fractions, but I'm still not, I don't have it simplified. Distribute 5x plus 20 plus x minus 4 equals 2. Positive 5x and a positive x, that's 6x. 20 and a negative 4 is a positive 16 equals 2. Now they're both simplified. Separate the variable from the constant. Since this is the only term with the variable, let's leave it here on the left. So we're going to take 16 over to the right, subtract 16 from both sides. We're left with 6x on the left equal to negative 14 on the right. So now 6 times x, we divide by 6. Always make sure you simplify your answer to little terms. A negative over a positive, my answer is negative. This is 2 times 7 over 2 times 3. So the 2's reduced, negative 7 over 3. What's next? Number 2. You can do the radicals as well. So number 2, 7/4 minus 3/5 times x plus 2/3 equals 9/4 plus 5/3 x plus 2. So 4, 5, 3, 4, and 3. What's the least common denominator for 4 and 5? 20. And now comes the 3. What's the least common denominator for 20 and 3? So 60 will undo those denominators. So we're going to multiply every term by 60. Each term should get its own 60. So you don't miss anything. Don't forget the that 2 there. Reduce before you multiply. 4 goes into 60 15 times. 7 times 15 is 105. Minus 5 goes into 60 12 times. 12 times 3x, that's 36x. Plus 3 goes into 60 20 times. 20 times 2 is 40. Equals 4 goes into 60 15 times. 15 times 9 is 135. Plus 3 goes into 60 20 times. 20 times 5x is 100x. Plus 2 times 60 is 120. No more fraction. Simplify both sides. All of this is still step 1. On the left-hand side, we have negative 36x. And then 105 plus 40 is 145. On the right, we have 100x. And 135 plus 120 is 255. Now step 1 is done. Step 2. Gather your x's on one side. So we're either going to take this negative 36x and add it to both sides, or we're going to take the 100x and subtract it from both sides. So we're going to keep it taken to the right or the left. What do you want to do? That's right. Right. So add 36x to both sides. And we get just 145 here equal to 136x plus a 255. Since we took x to the right, we now have to subtract 255 and bring that over to the left. (145) minus 255 is negative 110, equal to 136. Now you just divide by 136. X equals. Remember, you're only dividing by the 136, not 136 with an X. Because if you divide and put an X down here, then you don't have any X's on the right-hand side of you. I'm going to undo what's being done to the X, leaving X by itself on the right-hand side. It's a detail that may not mean a whole lot. You do the X, then you just go ahead and put an X anyway. Down here, you have an X. That means your answer should have an X over here. What you wrote is not what you have. Details matter. That means point state. Negative. This is 2 times 55. This is over 2 times 68. X equals negative 55 over 68.
Maybe one more, let's find the book. Number 5.
So we multiply. We have 5 square root of 4 minus 5 square root of negative 4 times 2 square root of 100 plus 3 square root negative 40. A long time ago, somebody said, you got to use the order of operations. And it is still true today. Order of operations. Simplify first what's in the parentheses. Your question on your test is written up just like this. It's very nice. Hopefully you'll say thank you and turn it in, but don't forget that 5 to get away from. What's the square root of 4? So it's 5 times 2 minus this 5. Now, when you do this, first thing you better remember to do is poke out the I, and then what's the square root of 4? That's a 2. So square root negative 4 is 2i. So it's this times, and I'm just going to go from left to right. Get away cars of 2. What's the square root of 100? 10. And then plus 3, get away cars of 3 times square root negative 49, going to poke out the I. What's square root of 49? 7. So that's a 7i. Now, before you actually do the multiplication, you're not done with what's inside the parentheses. Simplify. This is 10 minus 10i times 20 plus 21i. Now you're ready to distribute. You can't add or subtract 10 and 10i, 20 and 21. They're not like terms. So we end up with 10 times 20 is 200. Get your signs correct. Positive times a net, positive times a positive, positive. 10 times 21i is 210i. So that's 10 distributed to both of those. And then negative 10i. Negative times a positive is going to be a negative. 10i times 20 is negative 200i. And then last times last, negative 10i times positive 21i is negative 210i squared. Don't forget the I squared. It's a negative times a positive, so it's a negative, and then you have an I squared. And now we're just combining like stuff. There's nothing like a 200 yet, because that's a 200, that has an I, that has an I, that has an I squared. We can't do anything with this 200. And then we have a positive 210i and a negative 200i. So that is just a 10i. And then this minus 210, but what's I squared? Negative 1. Negative times a negative, this is now positive 210. So there's one last thing that we can do. This 200 plus that 210. 410 plus 10. All right. Open note, calculator.
put Alexa away, put Meta AI away, put Meta World Peace away. But we never thought of our pets.